Hi guys, Miss Francis here to talk to you about how molecules actually move across the plasma membrane. And it's actually the structure of the membrane that influences what molecules will be able to be transported. And then it's these molecules themselves that are going to determine what type of transport will enable them to cross the membrane. So for example, sugars, amino acids, and other nutrients enter muscle cells and metabolic waste products leave. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are going to be absorbed by the cell. Inorganic ions like sodium, potassium, calcium chloride, they are all going to be shuttled across the membrane. So this steady traffic of small molecules are going to cross the plasma membrane in both directions. Where there are two types of membrane transport. There's active transport and passive transport. Active transport requires energy, whereas passive transport doesn't. And that makes sense. If a person is active, they have a lot of energy. If a person is passive, they're probably sitting down, not exerting much of their energy. So there are four ways that substances can cross into and out of a cell. The first two ways we'll discuss are both types of passive transport. So first of all, you've got simple diffusion. When a molecule simply diffuses or just diffuses across the membrane, it goes with or down the concentration gradient. No ATP is needed, nor are membrane proteins. However, if I have a molecule that is being transported via facilitated diffusion, there's no energy because I'm still going with or down the concentration gradient, but this time I do need a membrane protein. When we're talking about active transport, remember active transport requires ATP because I'm going against or up my protein my concentration gradient, and I will also need membrane proteins. Bulk transport is the last type of transport that we'll talk about. Endocytosis and exocytosis are both types of bulk transport, and actually there are different types of endocytosis that we'll discuss in greater detail later. But nonetheless, bulk transport, you're going with or against the concentration gradient. So it does require ATP and it does require the use of membrane proteins. So here's an image that shows small non-charged molecules being able to diffuse across the membrane without the help of a membrane protein. However, charged molecules and bigger slightly molecules are going to require membrane proteins. And then on the other hand, active transport is going to require the use of either, in our case, sodium potassium pump and the proton pump are two examples of active transport that we're going to discuss that involve the use of membrane proteins. So what factors determine what kind of transport occurs? Well, the chemical nature of the substance. In other words, is it polar? Is it non-polar? What's the concentration of the substance? Is there a higher concentration outside the cell or inside the cell? And what's the amount of the substance? How much is trying to cross that membrane? As we know, membranes are selectively permeable. Well, how do they get this selective permeability? It depends on the interaction of the molecule that's trying to cross with the hydrophobic core of the membrane. So small, hydrophobic, nonpolar, uncharged molecules like carbon dioxide and oxygen can cross easily. Steroids like testosterone and estrogen can also move easily through the lipid bilayer. However, hydrophilic molecules, such as ions, which are charged particles, and they're polar, travel through with difficulty. So this includes, I have to turn on the lights. This includes water. It also includes glucose and other sugars, and ions, which are those charged particles. They're going to have difficulty penetrating the hydrophobic core. So how do they make it through the membrane? They make it through the membrane via transport proteins, through either a channel protein or through a carrier protein. Now, the channel protein does not require energy. A channel is formed where that molecule just passes through. However, carrier proteins involve energy because the shape of that protein needs to change in order to allow that molecule to come in. So like I said, how do transport proteins work? Either you have a channel that provides a tunnel, whereas others bind to those molecules and then carry their passengers across the membrane. Now, each transport protein is specific to the substance that it's going to translocate or move or transport. For example, the glucose transport protein will only carry glucose. It's not going to carry fructose or sucrose. Even though fructose is a structural isomer, it's still not specific enough. So just as review, oxygen, carbon dioxide, methane, fatty acids, hydrocarbons, steroids such as testosterone and estrogen are going to cross the phospholipid bilayer easily, whereas ions, charged particles such as calcium, sodium, chloride, and potassium are going to have a more difficult time passing, as well as polar molecules. So that's it as far as transport across the plasma membrane goes. Next time, we're going to get into greater detail about diffusion.